excited you're all here and grateful to you. This is an incredible partnership that we're celebrating with an extraordinary guest of honor tonight in Anita McBride and British Robinson, our President and CEO of the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. This is a cause that I have been involved in going back 25 years, chairing an anniversary right here in Palm Beach County. And so I think it's one of my favorite first ladies, of course, no doubt about it. But there are a lot of 6 degrees of separation between those of us here tonight, because I can remember many of you supporting that anniversary. Anita, her husband Tim, and I all worked for George H.W. Bush, and British is crossing my path, having known everybody in my history, so it really is an honor for me. One of the partnerships that we're so proud of is the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy and Norton Sculpture Gardens. Yesterday, if you had seen 250 students come in, learn about reading from best-selling children's authors that British brought in the foundation. And our wonderful program goes back 15 years there, thanks to our trustee, Cindy Salzberger, who's with us tonight. But those faces of elementary school students spending the morning in that dramatic setting of the gardens, storytelling, puppet shows, reading in Ann Norton's artist studio, it really was something to behold, and I hope that it lasts them a lifetime and this program continues. The program which the Barbara Bush Foundation has been working on in our area is now called Read Squad. It's celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and it continues to achieve fantastic results with students making reading games at remarkable levels. And I know British is going to talk a little bit more about that. But we're thrilled to have Read Squad programs operating in 4 of our local Renaissance charter schools this year. And we're so proud that Palm Beach families are experiencing truly the life-changing gift of literacy thanks to the Barbara Bush Foundation's work. Thank you, British. So now I have the incredible honor of introducing our special guests, British and Anita. British, the Foundation's president and CEO, was recently named to Forbes magazine's 50 over 50 list for impact and recognition of her decades of service to public and nonprofit organizations. And in fact, you're going to leave tonight with an article all about that. So exciting. Congratulations, British.
Thank you.
But before joining the Barbara Bush Foundation, British served as the founding CEO of the Women's Heart Alliance and held leadership roles at national nonprofits, including Susan G. Komen and Women for Women International. She also served at the U.S. Department of State as the Deputy Coordinator Director of Private Sector Engagement for the U.S. President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. That was under President George W. Bush. And under the Obama administration, she held a special assignment as Director and Special Advisor to the Office of Global Women's Issues. She's also now a member of the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens National Advisory Committee. We're so proud of that. It's a group of extremely accomplished thought leaders in art, culture, horticulture, and education, and they all came together last March, and so it's a pleasure to have you back and back in our home again, British.
Thank you.
Now we must tell you about Anita. Anita has public service that spans more than 30 years in the White House and State Department. She served in management and leadership roles in the administrations of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and as an assistant to President George W. Bush, and as we know, Chief of Staff to First Lady Laura Bush. What an elegant history and connection you have, Anita. Anita now serves as Executive in Residence at American University's Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies, and as the Director of the university's First Ladies Initiative. She's considered one of the nation's foremost experts in First Ladies, and now she's channeled that expertise into co-authoring the first university textbook on the subject, which is titled First Ladies, Making History and Leaving Legacies. We can't wait for this book. And we're going to be welcoming Anita back to share her book and her perspective this spring at Palm Beach Atlantic University through the Lemieux Center for Public Policy. So our students here have an opportunity to learn from you, Anita.
Thank you.
British and Anita, it's such a pleasure. Very
Thank
honored.
you so much. We're thrilled.
Thank you. And Frances, thank you for that very warm welcome, and thank you for hosting us here, and appreciate all of you all being here and learning a bit more about the Barbara Bush Foundation, but also our honored author, Anita McBride. I am blessed to know Anita. I'm thrilled that you get to hear a little bit more about her expertise. Anita is a friend and a mentor. She actually put my name in for this job, so I wouldn't be in this role. It's been exactly 4 years this month if it weren't for Anita, and just enjoyed working with her during the Bush administration, and we really got to know each other during that time. But Anita has a special title that I've given her, which is, she is a member of my Fab Four. And the Wall Street Journal did a recent piece about a year ago on me and my career, and really about lifting up the legacy and the life of Barbara Bush, who in my day job, she is my favorite First Lady. And Anita was part of that interview and part of that profile for me. So I've learned so much from her over the years. She's mentored me, she's helped guide me, but she's also been a dear friend, and we always have folks that are friends of ours. And as Anita explores in this point in my life where I have the honor to carry on the legacy of Barbara Bush, I get to partner with Anita once again with her expertise around First Ladies. So I hope you will learn a lot from her, as I've done over the many years that I've known her tonight. One other thing is, events like this, they're called in our sort of world at the Barbara Bush Foundation, they're called celebrations of reading. And one of the things many of us don't know is, and Barbara Bush knew this, we're 34 years old, that reading is actually difficult. Our brains are not hardwired to read. It's very complicated, no matter when we start reading, how we start reading, what walk of life we come from, urban areas or rural areas. It's complicated. So Barbara Bush saw reading as a gift, as a blessing. And every day I see reading, we see reading at the foundation as a gift and a blessing. And so tonight you are celebrating what she called celebrations of reading, because reading is complicated. And we want others to know that so many people, there are tens of millions of Americans who struggle with reading and writing. And if you can't read, write, and comprehend, you can't navigate your life with dignity. And so tonight we thank you for celebrating the idea and the concept, the ability to be able to read, so that you can be a full parent, worker, and citizen in society. And so tonight we celebrate Barbara Bush's life and legacy, and we celebrate what it means to celebrate the idea of reading with Anita McBride, as she talks to us a little bit more about her book that's about to come out, her textbook, and First Ladies. So with that, Anita, we will get after it.
Sure.
So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, British.
So first question, Anita, tell us about your new book. Why are First Ladies worthy of study? And how do you hope this book will shed a little bit more light on their unique role in our country and in the body politic?
Well, it's a great way to describe it as a unique role, because it is a unique role. Think of how many positions that are out there that are unelected, unpaid, but so incredibly highly influential. And the role of First Lady of the United States has been that, honestly, from the beginning of the founding of our country. So much so that even George Washington, as the new president of a new nation, knew this was a two-person job, being head of state and head of government. And he needed help with the head of state role, which was more, and still is, more of a ceremonial function. But over the course of the history of our nation, that role, that soft power role that a First Lady has deployed on behalf of the country has really transitioned into something more. And where there are initiatives that they take on that impact the nation. They're not policy makers, they can't be, they're unelected, but they are policy advocates. And all of them that have done the most that they can with this job, bring life experiences to it, bring interest to it, that add authenticity to the role. And and Barbara Bush, obviously a great example here, you know, when George H.W. Bush was running in 1980 as alongside Ronald Reagan now as the candidate for president, and he was running for vice president, Barbara Bush was jogging around Memorial Park in Houston, thinking to herself, what will I do with this position? This is now as a second lady. And really, it's where she honed in on what you just said, what Frances described too, about reading and education. If people can read, write, comprehend, have a much greater chance at a successful life. And that gave way to her decision to be involved in literacy, which she got to work at right away as wife of the vice president, and for 8 years was completely dedicated to this. And then, of course, as First Lady, when she came into the White House, her advocacy and lobbying, frankly, for the passage of the National Literacy Act in 1990 was a major example of, again, how the power of First Ladies throughout our history really can have an incredible impact on the nation's life.
And Anita, tell us a bit more about First Ladies and their causes, and how Barbara Bush really was the First Lady to continue her cause that she started in the White House, but many more had other causes. Talk to us about
Oh, sure. It's starting with the beginning of time. I mean, Martha Washington cared about our veterans, our Revolutionary War veterans, those who were wounded, who fought for the nation, for our new nation, and really did worry about them, and really lobbied too for a new legislature of the country to provide funding and support for our veterans. And that is a through line actually for all First Ladies, is the care and support of our military, our veterans, and military families. I mean, think about it. They are the spouse of the Commander-in-Chief. That's the President, the Commander-in-Chief's primary responsibility. And so that's a through line for all First Ladies. But you can look back through history, and you can see how Mary Todd Lincoln, she was another one, cared about the Civil War wounded soldiers. It was very difficult for her. She was never really accepted by both the North or the South, because her family fought for the Confederacy, yet her husband was pushing for the Union to be protected. But this was something that she cared about. In modern times, Rosalind Carter cared about mental health and really worked so hard as wife of the governor in Georgia. She was chair of the governor's mental health commission. So when she came to the White House in 1977, of course, President Carter thought he was going to put her in charge of the President's Commission on Mental Health, until he ran up against the roadblock of the legal counsel's office and said, you cannot appoint a member of your family to an official role. So she had to accept the role as honorary chair, which she did not like because she felt that conveyed someone who cut ribbons and did ceremonies, didn't really acknowledge the depth of knowledge that she had on this topic. Yet she persevered, is one of the few first ladies in our history that actually testified to Congress. Eleanor Roosevelt being the first. Laura Bush did briefings to Congress on early childhood education. That was a pillar for her. And Hillary Clinton, of course, too, on the healthcare reform task force that she was given, and that initiative by President Clinton right at the beginning of the administration, and it was not successful for her. And some of that, not because of that she didn't have the depth of knowledge over the issue, but it was the way it was executed, the lack of transparency, people on the outside and people on the Hill and others did not know what was happening behind those closed doors. And so that was not successful for her, but after that, of course, she retooled and focused on women's issues and women's rights around the world, of which is a signature issue that she is, of course, very well known for.
Absolutely. Anita, one of the other sort of causes, and I think is so important in our history, you sit on the White House Historical Association board.
Sure.
First ladies in their role in preserving the People's House.
Oh, sure.
Speak to that a little bit.
Sure. Similar to the care and feeding of our veterans and our veteran families, all first ladies and first families really have felt a sense of responsibility, of protection of the White House, the preservation of the White House. Bonnie, you know this, you're a member of our National Council on White House history, which, thanks to Jackie Kennedy in 1961, founded the White House Historical Association as a private funding arm, knowing that the federal government would never have enough money to preserve the White House, acquire the collections that really belong in the White House, acquire the art, manage their refurbishment when that was needed. And so thanks to her, she created this. But prior to that, I like to think one of the things that I discovered in researching this book, some of the lesser known first ladies and the impact that they had on the White House. And we have a chapter in the book called Stepping Back from Activism. And one of the first ladies that's featured in there is Bess Truman. She followed a very activist first lady, the most activist first lady in our history, Eleanor Roosevelt, who had press conferences on Sunday nights, who wrote a daily column, who had a weekly radio show. So here comes Mrs. Truman into the White House, who does not want a public role. First of all, because her father had committed suicide. It was not a public knowledge. She did not want that ever to come out. She lived in fear of that becoming public. So she was more quiet, more reticent, worked behind the scenes. But to your point about what First Lady have done on history, we know what Jackie Kennedy did in the preservation of the White House. But what Bess Truman did was protect the facade of the White House that was slated to be completely destroyed. If you remember, in the Truman renovation took about 3.5 years. The Trumans were sitting having dinner. The floors beneath them were shaking. They were creaking. A piano leg went through the East Room, from the bedroom to the East Room, the piano leg that their daughter, Margaret Truman, was playing piano on. It was falling apart. The White House was falling apart from the inside out. It had first of all, it had been burned in the 1814, right, by the British. It had to be rebuilt. It was rebuilt with wood. It was not rebuilt with metal. There were other fires that had taken place. But beyond that, by the time 1952, and then also, let me just say, the Coolidges had put a solarium on the 3rd floor. They called it the Sky Parlor. So it's a wonderful thing. All first families have enjoyed it since, but it was such a heavy weight at the very top level of the White House that truly the White House was collapsing under the weight of all of these renovations that had been done without really structural knowledge and concern. So what was determined by the Army Corps of Engineers is that the White House had to be completely gutted and really just destroyed. There was no way. We had to rebuild. Congress wanted to rebuild. It was cheaper than completely gutting it and reinforcing it and rebuilding. And it was Bess Truman, who had been a Senate staffer, by the way. She was a Senate staffer for her husband when he was senator. She knew how to work the Senate. She knew who was on Appropriations Committee. She was friends with a lot of the wives, the spouses of senators. She knew who was powerful, and she worked it. And she just said to these members of Congress that if you do this, the American people will never forgive you for destroying the one symbol that is most recognizable and emotional for them. And she was right. So there are so many first ladies in history that have acquired things that are iconic. Mrs. Lincoln acquired the Belter furniture in the Lincoln bedroom. It's the only room in the White House residence that's named for a president. That was for now. She spent her congressional appropriation for 4 years. She spent it in 6 months. She was highly criticized. Her husband was mad. Congress was after her. She's really never lived down that reputation. Yet she left pieces behind that are so iconic. The Monroes, after the rebuilding of the White House, after the burning in 1814, they had served in France as our envoy, and they liked French furniture. And so they acquired a collection made by Antoine Ballinger of 21 pieces of what you now see in the Blue Room. Beautiful pieces of furniture, again, iconic. You can't imagine the White House without them. Jackie Kennedy, of course, when she came in as First Lady, she's rummaging through warehouses and finding pieces of furniture that really had just been discarded by presidents. Also, many things had been sold off at auction, and she found one piece of the Ballinger furniture, publicized it, and it began to change people's minds about their connection to protecting the White House and how important this symbol is. But every First Lady, really, and First Family have had an impact on it, but those are, some of the major things that we can't imagine the White House without right now.
Absolutely. And speaking of, First Ladies didn't originally have their own office. We now have an office of the First Lady. You were obviously Chief of Staff to Laura Bush as a First Lady, but that wasn't always the case.
No.
Tell us about that. When did it start? There was a lot going on to create that.
Well, prior to 1902, when the West Wing was built in 1902, thanks to Teddy Roosevelt and Edith Roosevelt, his wife, they came into the White House with a big family. And they had, up to that point, the president's office and the president's family lived in the same space on one floor. And it was impossible for her. And she really pushed and also lobbied Congress for funding for the building of a president's office, which is, as we know now, the West Wing. It was something Caroline Harrison before her had tried to do, but her plans for it were so grandiose and they were not approved. But with that, now moving the president's office to the West Wing, the First Lady still was working out of her bedroom. First Ladies through history since our White House had been built worked out of their dressing room and worked out of their bedroom. There was no office. The East Wing, where the First Lady's offices are now, were not built until 1945. So that's when you began to see staff support for First Lady there. But they did not have their own office staff. They were borrowing people from agencies. They were still working mostly out of their bedrooms. Mrs. Hoover paid for her own staff, schedulers and assistants. There was no budget until Mrs. Carter. Because of what I had said earlier, that buzzsaw that she ran into to actually run an initiative for the president. And what it uncovered really is that there is no structure around a First Lady to support them officially. And so two things were happening at this time. This issue about the president wanting the First Lady to be in charge of something and needing support. And secondly, it was post-Watergate, and there was an entire different look on transparency around operations and personnel in the White House. And the White House Personnel Authorization Act of 1978 codified a staff for the First Lady, funding for the First Lady, but all of the positions are considered, to this day, staff of the President of the United States assigned to the First Lady. But that's when the official office of the First Lady really began in the late 70s. And beyond that, she was the first to hire a chief of staff. So I'm very grateful to her. Jackie Kennedy was the first to hire a press secretary. Edith Roosevelt was the first to hire a social secretary. So again, it's taken a lot of time to build a team around a First Lady, but in modern times, I mean, you can say anywhere from 20 to 25 people are supporting her in the East Wing.
Absolutely.
Right now it's a her and maybe a man in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was wonderful to see you in motion and to support you. And
British would be in our
Laura Bush.
office in the East Wing all the time. We were a hub of activity, but I have to say, very different, because I've worked in the West Wing too in my career in the Reagan and first Bush administration. And when I came into the East Wing, when Laura Bush hired me to be her chief of staff, I thought this would be a less intense milieu to work in. I really did, and I thought, because I had young children now at this point, I know what White House hours are. They're impossible. But Laura Bush was ready in her second term to be a real activist First Lady. Within 6 weeks, we're in Afghanistan. That was my first task, to take her to Afghanistan on a secret mission. I could tell no one, not even my own husband, where we were going. But there was a hub of activity always around our East Wing on both the global and domestic initiatives. It was really the capstone of my career. I thought it would be, really parties and cutting ribbons, and it was not. There was some of that, because that's a beautiful part of being able to share the White House with the public and with guests. But the depth of impact that a First Lady can have through the work that they do is what really turned me on to studying it, further, and to really documenting the lives and legacies of these women and what they have contributed, and most people don't know.
Incredible. So one more question,
Sure.
couple of fun, and I'll open it up to a little
Sure.
Q&A see if you guys can stump Anita.
Probably.
Fun facts, couple of fun. You have great fun facts around First Ladies that most
Okay.
people wouldn't know about.
Yeah, okay. So we're all used to hearing Hail to the Chief being played when President walks in a room, right? But that was not always the case. It was Julia Gardner Tyler, John Tyler's second wife, who suggested that would be appropriate for a president. And again, it's one of those things you can't imagine that not being the case now when a president walks in a room. I know there's a lot of others.
You have a lot
and
more.
I know.
Well, let's see if they can stump you.
Okay.
Any questions for Anita?
Well, if I could just for a moment,
Sure.
first of all, thank you, Frances, for hosting us
Yes.
all here. It's wonderful, and British, it's great to see you again. But I think you also should know that having had the privilege of working with Anita before she was the chief of staff, there were a lot of ambassadors that were brand new ambassadors under George W. Bush.
Right.
Not all of them were what I call citizen ambassadors. That is, we were appointed by the president.
Right.
Many of them had been State Department, Foreign Service officers who had finally reached the pinnacle of their careers by being invited to be an ambassador. And I'll never forget that I was sitting on a bus and I said we were going to the White House, and the whole bus was full of new ambassadors.
And they were the noisiest group.
And I said to someone, I think this is terrific that we're going, and Jean Johnson Phillips said, well, that's because Anita McBride is the real thing. The ambassadors that were with us, many of them had been ambassadors to 1, 2, 3 countries in the State Department. They had never been invited to meet the president that they served under until Anita McBride took over that program. So in front of me was a gentleman who had been in Greece and some other country, and he said, do you know, I'm embarrassed to say that I have never met the president I've served. I am so excited about it. Because when you go to a foreign country, you need a picture of yourself with the president because they want to know how much influence you have.
Sure.
And that makes a big difference. So I just want, Anita
Thank you,
was
Bonnie.
incredible. And I had the privilege of hosting her
In Finland.
in Finland with her family, and also when she became chief of staff, and Laura Bush
I
came
know.
to
Thank you
the
for that.
luncheon that we had. But I think it's
Thank
you've
you.
done such a great job, and when we talk about heroes, there's some she-ros for our country too, and honestly, Anita is one of them.
Oh, thank you,
And
Bonnie.
then I really think that people need to know that if you look at research, Pew Trust will tell you that the way that prisons and the occupants of prisons looking forward 10 to 20 years is determined is by fourth graders who cannot read. And I don't think there's a more powerful statistic about how critical reading is to the success of our children, and not just our children, but everyone's children. And so I applaud you in your leadership in this role, and thank you, Francis, again, for
Thank
hosting
you.
us all.
We'd be so proud of you.
Thank you so much for
Any
that.
other questions?
I know that wasn't a question.
That was great.
Sorry.
Beautiful. That
Matt?
was beautiful.
You have one more question.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting, and I do want to also say what a great organization to support and how important it is to support it, and especially that perspective of those fundamentals, that statistic, Bonnie, that you just shared is so important. So important to support the important work of this foundation in British, what you're doing. Anita, I'm fascinated to know, I just finished watching, I think it's a Hulu series, but I can't remember, but the Michelle Pfeiffer, that series. I think just one comment and then a question for
Yeah.
you. I thought it was so interesting to hear these really famous actors talk about, almost with shock and surprise,
Of
how
what
much they
they
learned
learned.
about these first ladies and what they did. Is the show accurate? Do you think you like it? Is it?
Well, it's off the air. It was completely panned, and you know why? It's because there was a narrative that they were pushing, particularly on the Betty Ford. Michelle Pfeiffer is a great actress, but the narrative of the show was to really portray Betty Ford's addiction problems or alcoholism, substance abuse. And we know that's all true, of course, but what she did with her life with that, to turn that around and to help so many, people, that was not really portrayed. Interestingly enough, Mrs. Obama had been approached by, Viola Davis, I think, who was playing her, and Mrs. Obama did not participate in the program. So there was something about it that it didn't do as well as they had hoped, even using all of that top tier talent. They didn't work with any consultants to do it. So there was no real depth and I was sorry because I was looking forward to it too. But again, the narrative on Eleanor Roosevelt, on her personal lifestyle, that was sort of the focus. So that was too bad because it was an opportunity and a missed opportunity to have a really popular series on First Ladies.
That's amazing because even you consulted with Veep.
For all 7 years, I consulted with Veep. If you've all watched the HBO show Veep, it is the one thing, though, I did say the writer, we don't talk that way in the White House. There was a lot of bad language. They just said, you stick to the technical edits, we'll write the comedy. Like, okay. But anyway, but no. But what it does underscore, Matt, is there is such an opportunity and an open landscape to get good information out there about these women and the role that they have played in our history, how they have supported their husbands to be president of the United States, some of whom would not have been president without them.
Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
And thank you, Fran.
Sure.
And that is, Anita, I know you mentioned that you were raising your children when you took this chief of staff
I
position
did.
for Laura Bush.
Right.
And tell everybody what your daughter is now doing
Oh, I know.
to impact literacy.
I know. Thank you so much. Well, one of the experience I think a lot of working moms always feel, you feel the guilt. You're not around your children a lot. Those hours in the White House were intense. My children were 3 months old and 3 years old when I started, and then 8 and 11 when this was over. That's a lot of years. And after, but with Giovanna, my daughter Giovanna, Bonnie knows my 2 children, Andrew and Giovanna, during the COVID year, she was a freshman in college at TCU, when everyone was sent home, and she used that time to actually put her memories of those years when I was in the White House to paper, and proposed a book to the White House Historical Association, a children's book, with using actual pictures and images that we had. It's a 24-page book about her experiences visiting the White House as the guest of Laura Bush while her mother was chief of staff to a first lady. And it's an adorable book. She's an award-winning author, a Texas Book Festival first prize for children, for early readers. And it is so, she's doing, and it's in its second printing, and Mrs. Bush was very kind to do the podcast for her, and because she felt too that people didn't think of the Bushes of opening up the White House to kids. Post 9/11 was tough there, and they didn't get to do the kinds of state dinners and things that they wanted to. So she loved that Giovanna authored this little book with pictures of Halloween and Christmas and Easter egg roll and swimming in the pool and playing with the birthday parties for the dogs. And so it's doing really, really well, and I think she's thinking about doing a second one now. So thank
Gigi
you.
in the White
Gigi
House?
at the White House. And it's the most colorful little book.
Well-
Very cute. Thank you for that. She published before me because my book is not out yet.
We can't wait. Tonight
Thank
was
you.
the ultimate teaser. I thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to invite everybody out to the Low Show.
Thank
Sit
you
for
so
dinner.
much, Frances. Thank you.